In 1991, Nintendo created the video game classic Zelda: A Link to the Past for the Super NES platform. 2 years later, Nintendo chose to follow up this entry with Zelda: Link's Awakening. However, Nintendo chose to follow up their highly acclaimed video game with the next entry being on Game Boy, a video game system with significantly less power and capability than the Super NES. Despite these limitations, Link's Awakening has still become a beloved entry in the Zelda franchise, with some individuals even preferring it over A Link to the Past. How did Nintendo manage to channel a sprawling adventure into a less powerful handheld console in such a way that it was considered as a worthy classic of the Zelda franchise, and not just a cheap spin-off game? Stay tuned to find out as we cover the Oscarina nominations for Zelda: Link's Awakening. Here with me tonight is my guest, Tom. Tom, thank you for joining me tonight.
Hi, thank you for having me, and thank you for scheduling this whole thing. I know I'm kind of a bear to schedule with since I'm over on the East Coast, but glad to be here. Happy to be here.
Yeah, not a problem. We managed to make it work. So, to summarize a bit about Link's Awakening before we get into our nominations, Link becomes shipwrecked on an island. It turns out that he is trapped on the island by the magic of the sleeping windfish. To escape the island, Link must acquire the 8 musical instruments and awaken the sleeping windfish. Link's Awakening is an action-adventure game, wherein you explore the overworld and dungeons, and use items that you acquire to fight monsters and solve puzzles. Link's Awakening was released in 1993 for the Game Boy. The game is published and developed by Nintendo. And Link's Awakening had a remaster in 1998 for the Game Boy Color. However, since the remaster was more than 3 years away from the original release date, it is ineligible for this year's Game Awards. As a result, we will be judging the original Game Boy game and not the Game Boy Color remaster. A number of the staff for Link's Awakening are the same individuals who worked on Zelda: A Link to the Past. Once again, we have Takashi Tezuka as director, Shigeru Miyamoto as producer, and Kensuke Tanabe as scenario writer. However, new to the team is writer Yoshiaki Koizumi, who would later go on to direct many other beloved Nintendo games. In addition, Miyamoto did not provide creative input to the staff for this project, which may be a part of why the plot and setting differed significantly from other Zelda entries. Link's Awakening has a total of 4 nominations. It is nominated for Best Gameplay, Discovery and Expression, Best Interface, Best Sound Effects, and Best Female Character for Marin. As a reminder, here at the Oscarinas, in the interest of keeping variety at the Game Awards, we try to nominate and award sequel games mostly based off of how they improve from their previous titles. As a result, we won't be talking as heavily about elements in Link's Awakening if they were already present in its previous game, Zelda: A Link to the Past. So, to start things off, the first category that we would like to go over is Best Gameplay, Discovery, and Expression. So the first point I have in favor of the game is that the improved narrative and setting makes the characters that you find in the world more interesting. Characters are colorful with lots of personality. Characters at times will have dialogue that's a bit surreal, which tells you a bit about the setting. There's a bunch of fun Nintendo cameos, and there's even an item trade quest, which involves talking to NPCs associated with it all around the overworld. If you find one NPC associated with the item trade quest, they'll not only give you their item, but they'll also have a small charming story segment that unfolds. And yeah, all of these things tend to help the discovery and exploration for me personally.
Yeah, I agree. I think that point you have about this sort of surreal dialogue is also really worth kind of highlighting, because this is a strange, dreamlike world that you kind of end up inhabiting or crash land on, and the sort of like other Nintendo cameos are a little bit uncanny when you first jump into this world. There's like a dungeon where you have to use a chain chomp. You have to like walk someone's chain chomp in order to get into the dungeon. And it kind of adds to this sort of air of just kind of almost revelry, but more strange than that, I guess. Like you end up with this weird sort of Nintendo collage over your Zelda. And I think like the fact that you brought up with it, like this is on the Game Boy, that this is kind of trying to cram a large world into this very small console, it really helps to have it borrow from these other Nintendo properties and make it be like, oh, this is still like this is my Mario game, this is my Yoshi thing, this is my Chain Chomp thing that like gets me into this dungeon. Just to kind of paint this weird dreamy picture of the world that you're inhabiting.
Yeah, it is kind of funny as sort of a paradoxical comparison, because I've heard part of the reason why Nintendo is so adamant about taking down fan games and let's plays and stuff is because they want tight control over their intellectual property. They don't want their characters being portrayed in a way that's not kosher with their how they want to portray their characters. And then you kind of got like Link's Awakening over here, where they kind of just pastiche throw everything at the wall, where it's like, yeah, sure, we'll throw Kirby in there as a dungeon enemy, why not? And it's like, I guess maybe in some ways it's because that was the early days of Nintendo, where they were still like new as a company, so they were a bit more willing to just experiment with just throwing their characters all over. But I don't know, though. In all honesty, I think that it works for the game, and it doesn't really detract too much from their, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that like it kind of does is it like there's sections in this game where suddenly you're doing a 2D platformer, right? Like you go down a ladder and you're in a dungeon that's very reminiscent of like something in Mario, and that might be jarring if not for the fact that you've literally seen a Mario character kind of walking around, right? I guess he's not Mario in the game. He's Marin's dad, but he looks kind of like Mario, and you're like, I'm pretty sure that guy's just Mario over there. What's he doing? And then you go into the dungeon. You're like, oh, I can jump around. I'm actually playing. This is Zelda with a Mario skin on it, or Mario with a Zelda skin on it. Whatever, one of the two.
Yeah, totally. I'd say that, at some point, the game throws enough odd, quirky instances that at some point you're just kind of learn to roll with it, and it just sort of makes it sort of a atmosphere where it's like, oh, now we're jumping on Goombas. Okay, sure.
Yeah,
moving on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now I'm playing Mario, but I'm still Link. All right, cool.
All right, so the next point that I'd like to elaborate on as far as discovery and expression is that the explorable section of the overworld starts out small, and it gradually gets larger as you acquire items to help you traverse the world. This still allows players to have freedom in exploration without risking them getting lost. And this is a bit more in contrast to A Link to the Past, where frequently they would just kind of turn you loose on the entire game world, and they'd have like multiple dungeons you had to solve, and it was kind of just like, figure them out in whatever order you want. Whereas here it's more like you got your village, then you got your forest, and it gradually expands your world piece by piece.
Yeah, which is something that like future Zelda games take and go a little bit more heavy with, right? Like it starts at like you said with Link to the Past, you can kind of go and you get lost in the world and you find a place where you have a roadblock and you're like, I guess I have to come back here later. Link's Awakening doesn't really do that. It doesn't let you get to the roadblock until you have the piece to clear the next hurdle, right? And that carries on into like later Zelda games as well, where you can't get to that dungeon until you've acquired this item. And then it kind of becomes a little bit more linear, which I think really works in Link's Awakening's favor, even though there's been, I don't know how much we're supposed to talk about future of the series in this, but there's been a return to that sort of like alinearity in the Zelda games since this game has come out. And I think that A Link's Awakening, Zelda 2, and The Legend of Zelda, all three had those more open world experiences, whereas Link's Awakening kind of started the trend towards a more linear design of the story.
Yeah, I think it's fine to bring up like future games if you're both either talking about the legacy of Link's Awakening, which is kind of important to understanding it as a game, but also to compare and contrast and see what makes Link's Awakening unique. I would say that it does make the game in general more linear for Link's Awakening, but even in the segments where it's like, you only have like one new area that you're supposed to be able to explore, it's still not a strictly linear thing. It's more like a Christmas tree, because even when you're just exploring a new little area, they always have little secrets and side quick little dungeon like escapades that you can go in by like, falling down a hole or going through a cave or things like that. So it's, it's not exactly like your, I don't know what's a good linear game. It's not, even in the most linear parts of it, it's not really linear. It's more of a Christmas tree thing where you got a point A to point B, and then you can go on little side trips here or there as you see fit and such.
Yeah, that's true.
So another improvement that the game did as far as improving exploration is that bomb walls are not always visible anymore. They sometimes require intuition to figure out where to bomb. And as a result, I personally find that finding the wall that's bombable and coming through there to get a reward is more rewarding. Like, it makes me feel more like I did a smart thing and I'm a cool little explorer that's, looking around the corners and finding something cool when I'm clever enough.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna kind of jump onto your next point here as well. They kind of use this well by having these very optional I guess, currencies that are the seashells that are kind of more secrets, right? So you kind of have this like incentive to find these very optional things, the kind of collectathon style of quest. But because those exist and they don't have to hide necessary items behind these crazy, complicated puzzles, you're allowed to just continue playing the game, but you are rewarded for exploring.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the game still has the rupees and the pieces of heart that they had from, Link to the Way, or Zelda Link to the Past, which are still fine and good as collectibles, but like the secret seashells are usually more difficult to get than your average reward, and they're also in a way more rewarding because you actually do get a fairly substantial upgrade if you collect enough of them. But once again, completely optional and so forth. So, if the players don't get it, they'll do just fine, but it's nice that they have an extra layer of, collectibles on top that you can do and you really want to challenge yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
The last point that I have in favor of gameplay for discovery and expression is that the game now has 2 hint systems to help you direct you on where to go next for when you become lost. There's a series of phone booths which provide hints on where to go in the overworld. There are also owl statues in dungeons which provide hints on how to complete the dungeon. These 2 hint systems help to ensure that more of your exploration time will be spent exploring new stuff and not as much time walking in circles figuring out what to do.
Yeah, this goes back to like what your point with A Link to the Past having too big of an overworld and you getting lost in it, right? Link's Awakening, starting out small and getting to expand, there's a real emphasis that the designers put on this idea of it's not necessarily linearity, but it is, making sure that you don't feel like lost and frustrated. With calling, I think his name is Ulria or something like that. I don't think I've ever said that name out loud. But like, there's different phone booths you can find. I think you can find 2 or 3 of them, and you give him a call up, and he'll say like, "Oh, hey, I'm pretty sure you should do this next." Which is always fun because then you can go find him, and I think he lives in Animal Village as well. You can go find him like in his house, and he's like, "Oh, I don't really want to talk to you if you're not going to call me on the phone." And then there's like a phone next door to him or something like that. So that's always fun. But yeah, going back to my original point, like within A Link to the Past, you do end up just kind of spinning your wheels, looking for what the next thing might be, and there's no real guidance system, or I don't remember there being a guidance system. Yeah,
I mean, not much more beyond the hint system. And sometimes the hint system is a bit more specific on, hey, you should probably go, try and help so-and-so with her chain chomps and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But like, first of all, even when they're more specific, they're not going to give you like a spot on the map to go. And second of all, there are some times where the guy can be a little bit vague, such that like, even though I had played this game like 10 years ago, there were still a couple of times where I got a bit stuck. In particular, the segment where you had the golden leaves and like you call him up for a hint and he's just like, I don't know, try different stuff out. It's like, well, I guess, man, but like, could you maybe make it so like if I ask you 5 times, eventually you start giving me more specific stuff or something like that? So yeah, they definitely, I think that, I guess maybe part of it is just that like, in order to constrain you to being a more linear thing, there are inevitably more roadblocks in Link's Awakening to prevent you from progressing. And so even if for no other reason than just that, you're going to have more times you're stuck because there's just more points where they block off your progress. Whereas like in Link's Awakening, when in Link to the Past, on the other hand, I mean, in that case, if you have a big open world, then you can just go in some ways, wherever you want. Then like, it's like if you can't figure out where to go here, then you just go to the other dungeon, you try your luck at that, or you go another place and try luck at that. Because it's all open, it's like you aren't really stuck until you're like completely out of options and stuff like that. Whereas here, they'll have blocks it at several points, and they try to give you some hints to make those blocks not permanently sticking. But if they're not, they might not be foolproof, and so some of those blocks are going to be a bit tricky, and you might get a little stuck and such.
Yeah, it's definitely 2 different styles of like dealing with players not quite understanding what they're supposed to do next. On the one hand, you have Link's Awakening that's like, well, this is what you got to do next. We're not going to give you another option. Figure it out. I don't know. Keep trying something new, right? And on the other hand, you do have A Link to the Past, which is a lot more like you can go run around in circles for a while. You might not ever figure out what you're supposed to do until like by happenstance you happen to be back here because you're stuck somewhere else. But hey, that's okay. You're not like just sitting here banging your head against a wall.
Yep. Fair points all around. So then, I mentioned several of the things that I liked about Link's Awakening exploration, but just to give the game a fair shake, there are a couple of things that I found to be a little bit of a problem for the exploration. So, for one, I personally wish that there was more worthwhile things to buy with your rupees. I mean, I acquired all the major item purchases only partway through the game, which rendered all the remaining rupees a bit useless. And the big thing that you spend your rupees on, which is the bow and arrow, I personally didn't really find it to be all that good. And so, it didn't feel like a great reward for saving up all that money. But, that's just my own personal experience with it.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think when I was replaying this one, I ended up, maybe it was just like me finally giving up that very frugal part of my gamer brain and being like, no, I'm just going to use the items that I have. But I ended up spending money on arrows into the last dungeon of the game, and I think I finished the game with like only a few rupees because I just kept getting beaten by that last boss and trying to remember which items work on which part, and eventually I was just like, oh, I need arrows. Arrows work on everything. Not everything. They don't work on everything. Don't follow that advice, but they were very helpful for me in that last boss fight because that's just kind of what I needed to use to get through it. So I did end up with a lot less money, a lot less rupees at the end of the game because I was just buying arrows. I would lose at the dungeon, go out, go buy some more arrows, come back to the dungeon, and then try it again, over and over again.
That's interesting. I think that maybe, like, for me, it was just too much of a pain to actually go all the way back to the main village. So if I did run out of rupees or out of arrows, I would just say, forget it. And I would just, use a different ranged weapon or something along those lines and such. But that being said, though, it might be, I know that there is a reward that you can get in Link's Awakening, I believe, that will like expand the number of arrows that you can hold. So maybe if I'd gotten a few more of those, I would have found the item to be a bit more useful and handy, because then I could really stockpile a while before I have to, get some more.
So the last point you have is that the items that are acquired from the last 3 dungeons of the game are not very significant traversal upgrades. They don't really open up new possibilities on the overworld. And I agree with you 100% on this, because I don't really even remember what the last 3 items you get are.
Yeah, so you get the Mirror Shield, a level 2 shield which reflects fire now and has a slightly larger area of blocking you. But
that's right.
Not really a game changer as far as traversing the world. Then you have the level 2 Power Glove, which lets you lift heavy objects, but like I can't remember anything outside of that one dungeon that needed that Power Glove. And then the last one you get is the Fire Rod, which is a powerful offensive item, but it doesn't really let you go somewhere that you're not supposed to be able to go before and such.
Yeah, I mean, I like the Fire Rod, but yeah, you're right, it's not very traversal heavy.
All right, so moving on to our next category, we've got Best Interface. So, first thing I have in favor of Best Interface for... Actually, I guess just as a quick aside, is there anything else you wanted to mention on the topic of discovery and expression before we move on to our next category, Tom?
I'd love to talk about the Rock's Feather, but I see that we're talking about that soon, so I'm going to save my points until then.
Certainly. A perfectly acceptable choice. All right, so then moving on, we have Best Interface as the next category that we would like to discuss. So the first point that I have in favor of Best Interface is that attacks are generally quite fast, with very little start lag and end lag. Especially your sword swing, the hook shot, and the Rock's Feather, which are practically instant. This makes it so that you can swing your sword so rapidly that you can deflect projectiles, and it also makes it so that you can use the hook shot as a close range weapon. As long as you don't miss, it ends up being out and back practically instantly. So it's pretty fun, in my opinion.
Yeah. I've tried that as well, and definitely spent more time missing than I think I'd care to admit. And when you do miss, it's kind of really punishing because the shot goes all the way out past your enemy, and you're just like, well, it's gonna hit me while I'm waiting for this to come back. But yeah.
All right, so then the next point that I have in favor of interface is that the Rock's Feather is not just a traversal tool, it also basically functions as a dodge button. In general, this was more fun to use as a defensive option than the shield for me personally, and it also made it so that you could charge your sword up and jump towards the enemy and then use your charge attack while you're still moving forward in midair. And it allows you to kind of harness the feather as an offensive option, which was also very fun for me personally.
Yeah, I think the Rock's Feather was such a fun upgrade, especially when you're considering this in like the sort of trajectory of The Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, A Link to the Past. It's not really a dodge, but it's very easy to think of it as a dodge in terms of like the current gaming world that we live in now, because you do just press a button and avoid an attack. Like generally, you're just jumping over the like hitbox of the attack or whatever. It's a top-down game, so you just kind of end up doing that anyways. But yeah, it kind of like really changes the way combat works in a Zelda game, and I don't think we really see that until in like a 2D game for again. Like, have we seen that again? I'm not really sure if we've seen like a really good dodgeable 2D game. 2D
I believe
Zelda
that.
game, excuse me.
Yeah, I believe that Oracle of Seasons at least had both the Rock's Feather and the Rock's Cape, which was like a super Rock's Feather. I think that Oracle of Ages may have also had just the Rock's Feather, but not the Rock's Cape. But yeah, overall, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not an expert on the Zelda games as far as to what extent the other games had the jump.
The oracles were ones that I missed, so I would 100% believe you that it had the Rock's Feathers in them.
So moving on, I would say that another thing that's nice about Link's Awakening's interface is that it makes very effective use of only having 2 buttons by making both buttons reassignable. Mm-hmm. So you don't even have to have your sword out. You can just basically have a shield and you can have a power bracelet and just make do with those. Having both be reassignable adds incentive to deal with enemies with tools other than your sword, which keeps the combat fresh. I mean, you might have just finished pulling out 2 utility items to solve a puzzle, and now you got some enemies to deal with. Well, I could pause and get my sword out, but it's more fun and interesting to just try and make it work with what you got. It also makes it so that you can arrange items in your inventory to be more conveniently positioned, so you can get them quick and easy when you do need to reassign things. And the pause button that you do use to reassign the buttons, it appears and disappears fairly quickly, and equipping within the menus is instant, such that the inconvenience is still there, but it's mitigated.
Yeah, one of the things I really like about this too is it sort of really mimics having how Link has 2 hands, right? So you kind of end up feeling like, okay, this is what I have in my left hand, this is what I have in my right hand, and that sort of like intuitiveness makes this feel so natural compared to like, I know this. Okay, so full disclosure, I originally played this actually not on the Game Boy, but on the Super Game Boy, which came out in 1994, and allowed you to kind of put a Game Boy game into your Super Nintendo and play it on that. But when I went back to play it on the Game Boy, because I had a Game Boy as well, I did really appreciate like the sort of very intuitive nature of just like, you have 2 hands, you have 2 buttons, what are you going to put in your hands? How are you going to deal with these things?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a nice little touch. Potentially intentional, but either way, I appreciate that next level of immersion where you got a thing in each hand. So another thing I'd like to mention as far as interface goes is that in general, Link's Awakening has a more helpful overworld map. The overworld map is black until after you've explored it, which means that if you want to try and go somewhere to progress the game, you'll usually have some success by just trying to find which of the black areas that you want to go to next. And when the overworld map squares do become visible, you can put your cursor over the square and it will give a small picture of a landmark if it's present. And you can either press A to give a description of the landmark, or you'll press A and it'll give you which region that the square is in. So you might find like a little corner, and then you press A and it's like, oh, wait, this is the desert? Shoot, this is the beginning of a whole new area. I should check it out some more and stuff, And also, aside from the overworld map, the dungeon map will also now show you item locations if you have the compass. Typically, midway through a dungeon, you'll acquire an item, which makes it possible to solve new puzzles and traverse new dungeon areas. And this chest indicator makes it so that when you're going back through the dungeon to find areas you need to revisit, like, okay, there's a chest there, so I should probably check that again now that I have this item, and it generally reduces wasted time. And yeah, those are all the things that I think were significant map improvements from the previous game, which is sort of part of interface.
Did A Link to the Past not have the compass in it?
It had the compass, but I don't believe that it would show you the chest indications once you got the compass. At least from when I did research for this script, grains of salt, because I don't believe I played, like, it's been many years since I played Link to the Past, so, I might be misremembering things.
Same. Honestly, we should have had someone who played it more recently on this, but oh well, here we are.
Yep. Sorry, guys. And then the last thing I have in favor of interface is that despite the small screen and limited colors, The game has cute pixel art, which makes the objects in the world clearly recognizable at a glance, which generally, for me at least, makes the world easier to navigate and deal with. And then those are the things I had in favor of the game for interface. A couple of cons that sort of detract a little bit from that. The first of those is that since you do only have 2 buttons and obstacles often require a specific item to deal with them, you need to re-equip Link rather often. As mentioned earlier, the pause menu is fairly quick, which mitigates the inconvenience, but that is still a bit of a bother for me personally. And then also, because this game was released on the original Game Boy, there's no color, which does make it a bit harder to distinguish things compared to the remake later on. As mentioned previously, it's mitigated by the nice pixel art, but it still overall is a bit of a bother. Alright, so that's about all that I had to say about interface. Next category I'd like to talk about is best sound atmosphere. The sound effects are impactful. The best example of this is getting the level 2 sword, which sounds utterly powerful in my opinion. But for some other more common examples, I think that the sound of a sword charge attack or enemies being defeated also convey a sense of power for me personally.
Yeah, I agree.
The sound effects for me are oddly satisfying. In particular, I would say that the sound of picking up a pot and throwing it, I could just listen to that like all day. And there frankly are times where you got a whole room full of pots and you got to throw them all, but like it never got tired for me because it just sounded so nice and satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Another point in favor of it is that I find the sound effects to be rather atmospheric. So when you're talking to Marin on the beach, the wave sounds, the seagull sounds, and the dialogue sounds are all soothing and convey the intimate atmosphere. Next, I would say that sound effects convey flavor about the environment. So, for example, if you kill a mini-boss, there's this sound effect that just sounds like this dreadful roar, and it really kind of conveys the idea that this thing you're killing is dreadful and beastly, and I really appreciate that. The next thing I would have to say in favor of sound atmosphere is that sound effects convey useful information about the environment. So we now have a compass, and it will cause a curious melody to play when there is a key that can be acquired in a given room. Or alternatively, if you swing your sword at an enemy and you hear a metallic ping, that's a hint that like, hey, this enemy is impervious to this, you should try something else. So yeah, those are both examples I would say where the sound effects are conveying useful information.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's so many different effects and, I guess, ways to fight enemies in this game that oftentimes you will try something and the game will say, no, that doesn't work. And it tells you instantly that that doesn't work. And you're able to kind of be like, okay, well, I guess I do have to readjust. I will say that the one kind of... This is a very nitpicky con that I have about the sound design of this game, but it's that this game was designed to be played on a Game Boy. And playing on a Game Boy, if you have the sound up too loud, you don't hear. You drain your battery very quickly. So I usually played this game without the sound on, and there were a lot of things that I missed just because of the medium that it was on.
Oh, I hadn't really known that. I didn't realize that the sound was a significant drain on it, so I just played it at full volume when I was a kiddo. But yeah, that is a bit of a problem, I suppose.
Yeah. It's such a nitpick, but it is one that I think I have to bring up a little bit.
Yep, fair point. All right, so for the next category we'd like to talk about tonight, we have Best Female Character for Marin. So the first point I have in favor of her is that she is a caring person concerned for the well-being of others. For some examples, she rescues Link from the shoreline. She expresses concern that Link would never wake up. Marin asks Link to be careful of the monsters in the area, and she scolds him if he is reckless and is hurt by those monsters. She also asks if Link is okay when she accidentally falls on him. She scolds Link if he hurts the cuckoos or breaks people's things. And she's even willing to brave danger, endure her fear of heights, and sacrifice her life to help Link on his quest. So all of these things generally reflect that she is rather concerned for the well-being of others, in my opinion. The next thing I would say in favor of Marin is that she enjoys Link's presence and has a crush on him. So she says she is glad that Link found her on the beach, and she asks to talk to him for a while. She says she wants to know everything there is to know about Link. She asks him to visit her at the animal village. She asks that Link not forget her. And she asks Link to accompany her when she sings. And in general, I would say that, a tendency for me and probably most people is that when they like you, you tend to like them back. So it generally makes it more enjoyable to be around her when she's, generally having positive vibes towards Link.
Mm-hmm.
Next thing as far as her for female character is that she is musically talented, and she uses that music to connect with Link. Song of the Windfish is a nice song, and she sings it with a pretty voice. She sings for the animals in Animal Village to entertain them, and she humorously says to herself that Link's initial Oscarina availability is not very good before trying to act like she didn't say anything. She also teaches Link how to play his ocarina, and afterwards, she shows that she wants to share her love of music with Link because she asks him, "How do you like it? It's really touching, isn't it?"
Yeah, I think this is one of my favorite parts about Marin as a character. I think music becomes so integral to The Legend of Zelda's identity as you end up becoming Link ends up becoming this kind of character that is very preoccupied with music, so much so that so many of the Zelda games have some sort of musical instrument that Link is playing throughout the game. I think this is the first. Haven't played Link to the Past in a long time. Instance of another character trying to share that with you and trying to teach you how to enjoy that space. And as you said, the Ballad of the Windfish is such a lovely song that it's very infectious, and you can kind of start to, appreciate it with her and through her.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, yeah, Link's Awakening is also the very first game where you get the ocarina. In the previous games, you didn't have that. But yeah, having not just get that new item, but use it as a point of connection with Marin is pretty great. When, like you said, Zelda in general has a long history of great music. So the next point I have in favor of Marin for female character is that she is curious and wants to explore. She wonders where the coconut trees come from, and she deduces it must mean that there are places outside of the island. She says that if she was a seagull, she would fly far away and sing for many people. And part of the reason that she has a crush on Link and wants to know about him is that he knows about the outside world, and she wants to know more about the outside world. So all those aspects make her an explorer, and as a result, fairly compatible with Link, who is also, as we know, quite the exploring fellow. And then the last point I have in favor of Marin for female character is that she is mischievous. When playing the claw minigame, she uses her pro gamer skills to pick up the store owner with the claw. And when there is a walrus blocking the path to Animal Village, she asks him, "Shall we give him a little surprise?" and plays her music for him. When the walrus's excitement causes him to fall off the path and into the ocean, she says, "Ah ha ha, wow, he certainly woke with a start," implying that she played the music more as a prank on the walrus than as a means to unblock your path. And if you happen to hit a cuckoo many times, despite her protestations, she actually will say, "Ha, do it more, huh? Oh no, it's nothing, I didn't mean it." Perhaps this is through realizing that the cuckoo isn't actually being significantly harmed by hitting it with a shield. It's a bit of an odd inclusion, but it does add to her mischievous nature as a character.
Yeah.
So I think that wraps it up as far as our categories in favor of Zelda Link's Awakening. So to conclude our video, as we have explained, the game Link's Awakening was able to innovate and improve on A Link to the Past, despite being put on less powerful hardware. The sound effects were still effective and good, despite the less powerful sound chip. The interface was fast and responsive, despite being restricted to 2 buttons. The exploration had improved secrets and player direction, despite having less memory to store map areas. And the game had a strong, lovable female character who the players were able to get attached to, despite the small number of pixels that showed her appearance. The game serves as an inspiration for game developers and people in general to continue to improve and innovate even when your restrictions are higher than they were before. 1993 turned out to be a crowded year for the Oscarinas. We ended up having significantly more game nominations for the year 1993 than 1992, and as such, Despite having 4 nomination categories for it, Link's Awakening did not manage to earn a Best Pixel nomination. Nevertheless, despite the lack of Best Pixel nomination, the game is still well worth playing, as evidenced by its large fanbase and multiple remasters. If you would like to play Link's Awakening yourself, you can play the original Game Boy game if you want to get the exact experience that we are judging here at the Game Awards. However, if you would like to maximize your own enjoyment, you should play one of the remasters of the game, either the remaster for the Game Boy Color or the remaster for the Nintendo Switch. I would say that the Game Boy Color version provides for a cheaper, retro experience, whereas the Nintendo Switch version provides for a more expensive but more modern experience. Anything else you'd like to add on, Tom, before I call it a night?
I would love to plug the Nintendo Switch version as well. I did just also do a playthrough on that. Most recently, my most recent playthrough of is on the Switch, and it's a really fantastic time. The art style is really fun that they kind of ended up going with, and it does have a lot more modern conveniences. Like I think you aren't just limited to 2 buttons anymore. Even though I was kind of applauding that in the original design of this game, it is nice to not have to switch so frequently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I have heard from many sources that happens to be a very respectable and excellent version for the game.
It's very good, yes.
So, with that, I bid you all happy gaming and a good night.